Good morning and welcome to everyone around the world today. I just wanted to really comment of my own evolution and thinking about women in philanthropy and changes in the world. And growing up in California, going to undergraduate at Berkeley, I never really felt a lack of opportunity for women until I arrived in Philadelphia and started to work for a firm that was founded in the 1830s. And that firm in the 1830s, no woman was allowed to work for the firm or be in the offices from 1830 to the late to mid 1960s. So it was kind of a rude awakening for me. And as I worked for what is now Deloitte Touche in the 1960s, I had a chance during the summer as a consultant to work for them. And the brightest person that I met was a woman manager, and she had computerized the tax code in the United States. And in leaving, I visited with a man that I was friends with, Neil Bursch, who headed the National Tax Office for them, and told Neil that, it's been a good 3-month stint, made a bunch of recommendations for them, and that I had met this individual who was one of the most impressive individuals I've ever met in my life. And in the 1960s, she had computerized the tax code. And I said, what I was surprised at is that she's a manager, not a partner. And he looked at me, a woman partner? There are no women partners in the world at this company. So even the progressives in California, I had a lot to learn in the 1960s. We have a very interesting panel with us today, and we're going to touch really about opportunities for women in many ways, but also how that touches philanthropy and how it's changed the world. And one of the areas that the United States of America, even today at the moment, is not recovered from was the opportunities for women beginning really in the late 60s, 1970s in America. And the United States in the 1960s was the most educated country in the world. Over a period of 80 years, the United States added 1 year of formal schooling for every year. And by the 1960s, the average adult in the United States had 2 years more of education than any other country in the world. Now, since that period of time, other countries have caught and passed the United States. And if we look and try to figure out what the United States was not prepared for, it was a situation that as opportunities for women to not just be a nurse or not just be a teacher opened up, you went from the best and brightest from our universities that taught America to a much different level of educational background and skills, and not being prepared for the change in the workforce. So today we have a number of challenges, and we have an individual who's led her own philanthropy revolution in the area of teaching, Wendy Kopp. Wendy and I met a long time ago when we were just young kids. Today we're just moving into adolescence, and Wendy revolutionized these ideas through Teach for America and today for Teach for All. Wendy, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, all around the world, as you no doubt know well, where kids are born determines really the kind of education they get and ultimately their life outcomes. This issue that we call educational inequity it's a raging problem in my own country. It continues to rage here in the UK, but it turns out it's a global phenomenon. And we think it's one of the most fundamental challenges of all that we face. Our collective welfare depends on our achieving rising educational levels and decreasing educational disparities all around the world. And yet, we send our top talent all over the world, everywhere but against that challenge. Think about, where your countries send their top talent into finance, technology, medicine, law, truly, with very few exceptions, each and every country sends our most precious resource, our most highly educated, capable, promising future leaders, everywhere but against what is, I would argue, the most fundamental challenge we face as a society. So the programs in the Teach for All network are working to change that. Here in the UK, Teach First is the top graduate employer now, recruiting top recent college grads, people of all different majors, all different career interests, to commit 2 years to teach in the highest need communities in this country, cultivating their leadership as an ongoing force for change. Teach for America, which I started 25 years ago in the US, now every year gets between 50 and 60,000 applications for 5,000 to 6,000 spots. So every year we're channeling 5,000 to 6,000 of not just anyone, but some of the most highly sought after graduating seniors into these 2-year teaching commitments in our lowest income communities. What we've seen is in both the US and the UK, where Teach First has been going strong for 11 years now, is the long-term impact of doing that. We can see what's happening in communities where we've been placing a steady stream of people over time. Here in London, it used to be that we had huge achievement gaps between the most disadvantaged kids and the most privileged. Now you're better off being a disadvantaged kid in London than an average kid in the rest of the UK, because we've made so much progress in improving educational outcomes for low-income kids here for many reasons, but certainly one of them, based on if you start reading the studies and the research, is the influx of incredible talent through Teach First. So finally, I'll just say about, I wasn't thinking about anything but addressing this in my own country, in the United States, as of about 10 years ago, but there was something in the water in the rest of the world. And within a year, both the folks at Teach First and I started meeting people in 13 countries within 1 year, from India to Lebanon to Pakistan to Chile to the next place, who were just determined to bring this model to their country. So that's what led to Teach for All, which is now a global network of organizations in 35 countries and growing, that are enlisting their country's most promising future leaders in addressing this issue. And as part of a global network, we're sharing solutions, which has so much potential to accelerate progress over time.
So this session, is titled Transformation of Philanthropy. And I think one of the keys we step back and understand is, how do you leverage your philanthropy? How can you transform a society? And in the opening remarks here by Wendy, just understanding that if you can change the ability of the teacher in a community, you can transform that community. It was almost 50 years ago at Berkeley that I wrote down this formula, really focused on how we could create growth, prosperity, and opportunities. And that formula really started with the concept that the major asset in any society is the productivity of the individuals in that society. And with 50% or more of most societies being female, how do we get all participating in that society and equal access in that society? And so Gary Becker won a Nobel Prize in 1992 for this concept of human capital, really defining this capital, and that is the productivity of the individuals. And so that issue is estimated to be 75% of the real assets of any society is the productivity of its people. Kevin Murphy, who won an award a number of years ago, is the leading economist under 40. And unfortunately, with Dr. Becker's passing earlier this year, has taken up the mantle as probably the leading professor, leading economist in the world in this area, has estimated that the human capital component could be as much as 90% of the assets of a country. So these don't appear on the balance sheet. And how do you increase human capital? We're going to talk about it today. We've touched on the first one, and that is education. And so you increase human capital by giving a person knowledge, a willingness to learn, an ability to learn through their life. Other ways are through extending the length and the quality of their life, through medicine and science, etc. And the third, which is more of a micro than a macro for the planet, and that is immigration. and many countries have dramatically benefited from immigration by moving people from one part of the world to another. Now, another area that we've really focused on in recent years has been science, and it's known as STEM education. And Alexis, if you could kind of give us your focus there,
Sure.
but how you got interested and
Sure.
why you got interested.
Well, good morning. It's a pleasure to be here. And I think staying with the theme of philanthropy, you have three very different women with three very different approaches to philanthropy. So I will talk about my approach and really how I perceive philanthropy. And the best philanthropy is the most effective philanthropy, and how you roll that out for you and how you scale it. So what I decided to do is think about what was the problem and what was the solution of where my passion was at the particular moment. And my passion right now is all around STEM, and that's getting women in STEM, keeping women in STEM, attracting women to STEM, and most importantly, graduating in STEM. And I call that inclusive economics, because there's one statistic that I think we should all think about for just a moment. And when I say it, it's just sort of staggering to me normally when I say it. And that's that 9 out of 10 jobs in the next 10 years will have some STEM component. That's amazing. That means that's a big structural transformation, not only in our society, but in the world. But everything we do has an interface of technology, an app, a software. So when you step back and think about it, that is true. Probably 9 out of 10 jobs, this is from the Labor Statistics Department in the US. That means that 50% of our population has to really start thinking about how are we going to educate everybody so that it becomes inclusive economics and we're including everyone. So the problem, and how I think about this in a philanthropic way, is what is the problem? Does it connect to my passion? And what's the platform I'm going to use to scale this problem and address it? So the first problem is we do not have enough women graduating in STEM to approach this metric of 9 out of 10 jobs will be STEM related. So how do we think about getting more women to not only think about STEM as careers, but stay the full course and graduate in STEM degrees? So my passion was being a good role model, thinking about everyone I know that could be a role model, and what was my platform. So I decided to make a philanthropic donation in London at one of the top schools that really focus on graduating women STEM, everything from quantum physics to epigenetics to medicine to MBAs. And it's Imperial College. And I went away for about a year and looked at how many women graduate, how many women drop out, what's the potential there, what's the positive potential there to put a beacon of light using philanthropy to scale something that was really important, not just to me as a personal interest, but also to the nation. So I donated $100,000 and made a commitment for 3 years to focus on women-led innovation in one institution to see if we could really change that dynamic and make people aware of the fact that innovation is really the single most important thing that adds to our productivity as a nation. And I want to include the 50% of the women that start in universities in STEM but drop out slowly towards the end, that there is a reason for them to stay. And it's a cash prize to say, just go innovate and let us help you scale this into a company. And along the way, we're going to coach you, mentor you, and give you all the tools you need to go out as an innovator. You know, it doesn't matter if you fail or not, just try and actually create companies that are STEM related, be a positive force in society, positive force in the economy to do something that will really transform your life and really the greater world. So the plan is to scale these in a very big way through institutions that really need a boost or a beacon of light to encourage women to stay in and be very innovative and contribute to the STEM deficit that we have.
I think, Alexis, we cannot stress enough the importance of this issue. If you look at what's happened in developed societies over the past 50 to 60 years, you've seen we've gone from jobs, most of which did not require a skill. So only 20% of jobs in the 1950s, early 1960s, if we looked at the United States, for example, required a skill. Today, in the developing world and in the developed world, it's changed dramatically. So in the developed world, 65% of jobs require a skill, 20% require a semi-skill. In the United States alone, we now estimate the challenge that Alexis has put forward here, that there will be 73 million jobs that would be available in the United States if we had people that were prepared for those jobs. And when we talk about STEM, we're talking about science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So that's what STEM stands for. And it's interesting, Alexis picked Imperial College, which has had 12 Nobel Prize winners over the years. And the UK has done something that most developed nations did not do, and that was over the last 4 years, whereas many countries, the United States being one of them, did not increase their support for bioscience, etc. The UK recommitted to this effort as a growth area. And today there are 5 universities and academic centers in the biosciences among the top 20 in the world here in the UK. That would be Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial College, London University College, and the University of Edinburgh. So that leadership by the UK has been very, very, and we believe important for the future, and it's carried around the world. I had the honor 6 or 7 years ago to help cut the ribbon at the opening of the Imperial College Diabetes Center, which took place in Abu Dhabi. It was one of the most advanced centers in the world. And the individual who ran that center was a woman doctor who had come from Imperial College in the UK to deal with these issues in that part of the world. And so as we think about these issues, this young investigator, the supporting people, role models is essential. To think of a role model, I can think of no better role model than Precious, who joins us today from Johannesburg. And I've been honored that she's joined me in the Giving Pledge with her family. Precious, let's talk about some of the things that are most important to you.
Thank you, Mike. It is an absolute honor to be here this morning. As you say, I flew in from Johannesburg yesterday, left my 3 boys at home to come and join this wonderful audience of women. You talked about role models, and I think I was talking to a friend yesterday about how we as women raise our children, and that's boys and girls, and we become their role models. We're the most important people that teach our own children in terms of how they value each other, how they value and how the society values them. So I'm hoping that by being here and leaving my children at home, they realize how important it is for me as a woman to be, actively involved in building society, in education, and in changing things for the future. But talking about what we do in Johannesburg, my husband, Patrice, and I joined the Giving Pledge, inspired obviously by people like yourself, Mike, Warren Buffett, Bill and Melinda Gates. But we joined the Giving Pledge beginning of this year as a way of rearticulating and recommitting to the work that we have been doing in South Africa since 1999. I grew up in the township of Soweto as a young girl, and most of you know the history of South Africa, the legacy of apartheid then, and opportunities were not really that great for young women growing in the township. And I found that looking back, one of the things that have really, really made me who I am today and being able to sit here in this wonderful audience was my education. And that was a really important, crucial deciding factor in my progress in life and my husband's, I can say. So I'm very, very passionate about education and its importance in giving people opportunities. So in our mission, in the work that we do, education, particularly educating young people in the STEM areas as well, in South Africa being one of the developing nations, is crucial to us. This year alone, we've managed to take about 400 students through tertiary education in these STEM areas. We fund their complete education. If they're doing engineering or medicine, it's from the first year right up to the 7th, to the final years. And it's looking at funding their academics, their boardings, their whatever they need for the school, so they can completely focus on their studies. And we found that going around the communities, which we do, Patricia and I, very often, and we have these town hall meetings, and we invite parents, we invite community, because part of our philanthropy is really working with the communities from the ground, because we believe that they know best how to solve their challenges, how to solve their problems. So we find that when we go for these town hall meetings, it is the old woman from the local community, an uncle, young kid, who come and celebrate seeing these young people who are going now for the first time to university through the funding that the foundation provides. So it has become a community thing. There is so much joy, there is so much inspiration, and really positive energy in the poorest communities in South Africa, because of the hope that the work of the foundation seems to bring them. So education is, for me, as Mr. Nelson Mandela has always said, it is a key that opens many doors, and we passionately believe in helping with education. The other areas that we focus on are particularly around supporting women businesses and supporting youth businesses. We know that the sub-Saharan area is South Africa. The youth population is huge. It is, I believe, about 44% of young people in the sub-Saharan region are between the ages of 15 and 29, compared to Europe, which would be about 16%. And this is going to be growing, going forwards. So it is either a time bomb or it is an opportunity for us to, as you correctly said, Mike, invest in the human resources for the future. By supporting these young people, we believe that they will be able to help us realize the demographic dividend which Africa can really benefit from, and to drive the economy of our region. We have seen with studies with the World Economic Forum Global Competitiveness Indexes and other indices that have been done around the world that in communities where education, skills development, mentorship, incubation, entrepreneurship are supported, these communities thrive and they do well for themselves, but also for the benefit of their communities. So our philanthropy is really driven by our local context and our experiences as South Africans, but it's also driven by a realization that for us and our children to thrive and survive in South Africa, we need to have more inclusivity, more people participating politically and economically in the growth and development of our area.
Precious, thank you. And I think there's a bunch of points that are very important that you've made. First, the fastest growing parts of the world economy are in sub-Saharan Africa. In this century, either 6 or 7 of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world are in sub-Saharan Africa. And we could look at a number of reasons why that's occurred. One of the reasons that that's occurred is advances in medicine. In almost every area of medicine and medical delivery, etc., women have been at the forefront. Not just raising children, but also pushing. It was little more than 30 years ago that a woman named Elizabeth Glaser in the United States got HIV and eventually AIDS from blood transfusion, and she formed, along with our support from the Milk and Family Foundation, the Pediatric AIDS Foundation. And today, the probability of passing HIV and AIDS onto your children has dropped from 90% probability to 2. 2/3 of everyone in the world living a relatively normal life today with HIV or AIDS, 2/3 of them live in sub-Saharan Africa. And life expectancy in one in one generation has increased by 50%. So when we look at this tremendous growth and potential, and as Precious pointed out, the African continent is the youngest part of the world, partly due to these dramatic changes in healthcare. Average age in sub-Saharan Africa is 19 years of age, compared to mid to late 30s in China, the United States, and even older than that in Europe. So, as Precious said, this is both the opportunity and the challenge to change the world in what's occurred here from that standpoint. The Gender Quality Index, which was published this morning here in the UK, I think sends a message to all of us. Today, one of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, Rwanda, ranks 7th in the world, whereas the United States ranks 20th and the UK ranks 26, and there's opportunities. And so these young societies and the changes led by individuals such as Precious have a chance to not only lead sub-Saharan Africa, but serve as role models for the world. When we talk about the importance of bioscience, it is also to stress and talk about STEM education, that bioscience has been accountable for about 50% of all economic growth in the world in the last 200 years. The number one, maybe greatest achievement of civilization has been the extension of life. And so we've gone from a period of time that in the beginning of the 20th century, life expectancy on the planet was 31 years of age. So over 4 million years we had extended life for ourselves and what were ancestors of us by 11 years. So we extended life by 11 years. In 11 million years, 4 million years, we extended life by 11. I knew I would get that right eventually. So it took 4 million years for 11 years. In the last 114 years, we've extended life by 39 years. And a great deal of this achievements have been due to the work of women in the sciences. The youngest person ever to win 2 Nobel Prizes was a young woman in France named Madame Curie. And with that, I'd like to turn it, Margaret, over to you as the head of our Faster Cures Foundation in Washington, D.C.
Thank you, Mike. So Faster Cures is a center of the Milken Institute, and we look at how do you speed up the medical research system for all. We've focused a lot in the United States, but increasingly we're looking at the world because disease knows no boundaries, and the problems that have afflicted the medical research system are pervasive throughout the world. If you look at healthcare decision-making and the role of women, 80% of healthcare decisions, at least in the United States, are made by women. I was telling Mike yesterday that I Skyped with my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, who had a skin infection on her face. I'm having her put the phone up to her chin, and I'm saying to my husband, you need to not turn off the TV. It's not Harry Potter marathon time. You need to get up to the ER and get that checked out. I think that the role of women in not just healthcare decision making is an important one to focus on. Certainly the issues that Alexis raised in terms of STEM education, Wendy's education issues, Precious in education. I think that Faster Cures has a role to play in all of that in terms of looking at how do we accelerate the system. Many of the not-for-profit disease foundations that we work with were started by women. Many of them had the disease themselves that they're trying to fix and really felt like no one was going to solve the problem but them. So we have kind of witnessed incredible transformation just in the short period of time that Faster Cures has existed. And look at this train network, there's a slide up there now, as a real source of inspiration in terms of some of the different practices out there. So I think that the role of women in medical research needs to be looked at critically. There's a bunch of issues that we can unpack related to investment in women, and Alexis certainly teed that up nicely in terms of whether or not women are able to access early stage funding. So I think, Mike, that's an important topic to bring up and certainly get this group to discuss. But I just think that the issues of role models in all of the above are critically important. So last week I did some crowdsourcing of my colleagues at the Milken Institute and beyond because I was giving a career talk at my daughter's school. And it was interesting because they had previewed what I was going to talk about, which was the Faster Cures model. I'd say the majority of the audience, about 75 kids, were young girls. I looked around the audience, and there were a couple of girls that I knew that have already lost parents to different diseases. And I sat there thinking, you know, does it make a difference if they get to see me up there talking about a career in science policy? One of the things I brought up, Precious, to your point about being here and not with your 3 children, I showed a picture of the Eiffel Tower, and I said, the headline was, "Work travel is fun, but it's hard." And, you know, with my daughter in the room, I said, you know, I make decisions every week about time I'm going to spend away from her, but the importance of what I'm doing. The kids, of course, were oohing and eyeing at the Eiffel Tower, and I said, you know, that's from the lunchroom of the meeting that I went to. I never really got to see it, other than, you know, snapping the picture out the window. So, Mike, there's a number of, you know, great issues that we can talk about here. The Faster Cures model, though, just briefly on the philanthropy piece, we have a program called the Philanthropy Advisory Service Project. This was conceived out of 2 grants from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and the Gates Foundation to create a set of metrics for medical philanthropists. And the way that it's evolved is we've created the metrics, but we are really working individually with philanthropists around specific diseases that they're interested in. And I would say usually it's because there's an index patient involved, but they're interested in changing the world for everyone. And you know what we've already been learning through that process, I think, has been critically important to several important areas that didn't have treatments or cures available. I'll just close with one statistic that I used yesterday, which is that there are 10,000 known diseases, and right now we have treatments for only 500 of them. So clearly in the medical research area, in the science area, and health area, there's a lot of work for both men and women.
If we go back and think about that formula I wrote down almost 50 years ago at Berkeley and look at the fact that it was the multiplier effect, the access to capital. So yes, we have people with enormous potential, that human capital area, but you needed access to financial capital to serve as a multiplier effect. You have a good idea, you want to build a company, but who is going to finance that company? And it was almost approximately 30 years ago today that really we had financed the first woman in the United States who bought one of the S&P 500 largest companies for the first time. And it was shocking to me of how much hate mail I got. How could you do that? How could you finance a woman against other competitors to buy a company? And so it is only a short period of time, but I just want to stress how far we've come. So if you had asked me in 1985, what was the probability that a woman would be the CEO of a company that was really the leading company of the 20th century, IBM, that a woman would be the CEO of what, for most of the 20th century, was the largest company in the world, General Motors, and what was the probability that a woman would be the CEO of the largest defense contractor, Lockheed Martin? I would have told you, I don't know, 1% or 0. So when we think of how far we've come, the fact today that the CEO of General Motors is a woman, the CEO of IBM is a woman, and the CEO of Lockheed Martin Manor today is a woman. Lexis, let's talk for a moment about that access to capital and how you've been looking at VCs and women-led businesses.
Right, absolutely. So I started my talk with effective philanthropy and isolating a problem, and ended up with inclusive economics. So I want to pull up a few slides to show you, while we've made great progress with women being CEOs of large companies, we've not made great progress in taking that innovation of women coming out of college and funding them. So let's pull up slide 3 first. And what this will show you is that these are venture-backed deals, and I want you to focus on 2 lines. The top line is retail, we gravitate in financing companies where we think women have a distinct advantage. The bottom line is software. So this is percentage of deals in the US that have received funding that are women-led. So what this tells us is we are missing an enormous potential of all the women that could fund, could create companies that we could fund. We skip over that. And look at pharma, biotech. I mean, we are really missing a big tranche of economic innovation through our lack of funding. Let's pull up slide 5, which I think is also very interesting. So if we looked at the historical bias of total number of IPOs, those led by women CEOs, the blue is men, the green is women. So while we've made some great progress, this is 2013, we have 2.6% women leading IPO exits. So what's wrong with that picture? That picture means that we're not funding women to go out and start their own companies, and we're not funding women to go out and create their own innovation and scale. That's really important to me as a philanthropist, because I have the financial power to go out and do something like an innovation award at Imperial. My personal goal is to fund women, I'm a venture capitalist as well, to fund the women, everything below that retail line, including that retail line, all the way down to software. I want to go fund the women that have the great ideas in science, technology, engineering, and math, so that they can be the next Mark Zuckerberg, so they can be the next Bill Gates, so that they have the real economic power to be great philanthropists, great CEOs at the beginning of their career, not just the end of their career.
Well, thank you. And I think I'd like to call on, if we could, a couple of our hosts for today. I'd like to start with Marissa Drew from Credit Suisse, and Marissa, you've heard a number of comments. Do we have microphones in the audience here? And I think some of the areas that you've been active with the concept of room to read and others, how you focused on this philanthropy issue and transformative philanthropy.
Well, actually, I should start by saying Credit Suisse has been a longtime supporter of Teach First in the UK and Teach for All. I think our partnership goes back, I guess, originally to 2009 from the US, but when Teach First got started here, I sit on the philanthropy board of Credit Suisse for the UK. We identified the good work that and the good vision of Teach First to put high quality business future leaders of the world into schools in the most impoverished areas, and we're incredibly proud of the fact that I think, to date, is it 5,000 or more, I think, that we have put into the school system, so it's an extraordinary number. And I personally have been to the schools and seen this in action and what you can do to just change the equation. But Mike, you mentioned capital. I think that is one of the biggest issues, is that, how do you have access to capital? How do you take big business and marry that with philanthropy in a productive way? And I think from our point of view at Credit Suisse, what we want to do is not just move the needle with our finances, but also to take the human capital that we have and apply it to philanthropy as well. So it's taking our employees and using their skill set in the various situations that we support, and making sure that we're also giving back. And I'll tell you, it creates an incredible positive, virtuous circle, because you've got employee engagement. At the same time, you're providing productive skills. So Teach First is a great example. You mentioned Room to Read. Room to Read is also a business-minded approach to philanthropy around the area of literacy. And their key focus, because the founder was a business person in the early days of Microsoft with Ballmer and Gates, and his whole idea is that we spend way too much money on expenses in the philanthropy world, and if we can shrink that down, then more money ultimately goes to your causes. And so we do things very creatively, like donate our frequent flyer miles of our bankers to allow him to fly around the world. We donate office space to him so he doesn't have to pay for rents and so on and so forth. So these are just a few of the things that we do that I think are pretty exciting and a little different.
And just to say, there have been 56 Credit Suisse global citizens who have been working across the Teach for All network to build the capacity of these social enterprises that are, popping up to replicate and adapt the Teach First model all around the world. So it's incredible what you all are doing.
And we fund people's vacation. So what we say to them is, if you want to use your vacation time, we will fly you to locations with our key partners and allow you to immerse yourself. So again, we're encouraging our employees to take their time and providing a little support around the edges.
That's fantastic.
I think one of the points I'd like to emphasize Marissa has just made, and that is the concept of volunteerism. So a lot of times when we talk about philanthropy, we think of dollars, financial investment. But the greatest part of philanthropy is giving of your own time and your own skill set, and the ability to mobilize firms such as Credit Suisse in this area, the skill set of the people that on balance are highly educated to interact. I'd like to turn to another one of our hosts this morning, Helena from Newton Investment Managers here. And among other things, I'd love if you would touch base on the 30% Club.
Thank you, Mike. And I think I'm going to stand because I've always got my back to almost everybody. So apologies those behind me, but hugely inspired by the stories that we've heard today. The 30% Club has been working more on the human capital side of the equation, or input into the equation, certainly in terms of trying to fulfill women's economic potential. And I've just read that story. They're out just this morning. We've got only 71% of, in this country, the women only have 71% apparently still of the economic opportunity that men do. But that's not just an issue for us, of course, that's an issue for all businesses. So what the 30% Club has been doing for the past 4 years is really getting men to champion change. You've got a little booklet, I'm not going to wade through it, but you'll see on pages 3 and 4 the supporters of the 30% Club in the UK. And there are 114 at present, and I think there's only 8 are women, which is another problem. We'll try and make that more 50-50 in future. But what's really been impressive is to see how the conversation has shifted here. So the mindset is less about this is a women's issue, and we need to have women sorted out, and much more about it being a business issue, and men and their colleagues, not just chairmen of boards who are the members of the club, but their senior colleagues in terms of driving change and trying to get more sense of urgency about addressing the issue, because I think it has been a shared phenomenon globally, which takes me on to the other point. We've been focusing on, first of all, UK FTSE boards, and you'll see on page 2 a very pleasing line shape in terms of the progress made on that particular metric in the past 4 years. And it has to be honest, been quite surprising just when people have got there in terms of the will to change, how everybody has rallied around it. But what we've now doing is moved in 2 dimensions. One is sort of going to the schoolroom to boardroom journey, and it's very interesting to hear your efforts, including on the STEM subjects, because clearly it's far too late to be trying to get women on boards if they haven't got the technical skills and the experiences that are needed to qualify. And then going more internationally, this is obviously a global phenomena. There's now a 30% Club in the US, as Nancy mentioned, just started, led by Peter Grauer, chairman of Bloomberg, from late April this year, so early days. But again, having men and important CEOs and chairmen of companies leading the charge and trying to galvanize a real accelerated pace of change. And then there's one in Hong Kong, Canada, Ireland. We have interest from some of the continental European countries that have quotas but haven't seen much progress below the board. And then everywhere, Middle East, Asia, etc. So if anyone wants to find out anything more about it, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to mention it, then my details are on page 17. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think one of the things that we see when we think about how do you transform philanthropy, there are 3 things that I have seen over the last 40 years that really do it. One, this concept of passion. Do you have passion for what you're doing? I think so far the 6 people that have spoken today, I think, give you a feeling for that passion. Second, patience. Just the fact that it takes a long time to change the world. You have to stay with it. And lastly, obviously, staying with it, persistence. You know, there's nothing that succeeds. Thomas Edison told us, like persistence in this. And I think Wendy can tell you that when you start out on a journey that you think has very few challenges, that you're doing good. That there's a lot of things that you change in the world because you are changing the world.
Mike,
from that standpoint.
in the
Margaret?
spirit of persistence, can I ask a question actually of Wendy? You talked about the school age piece of this, that we really need to start mentoring girls at a young age, and yet education has traditionally been a more female-dominant, sort of profession. I was remembering a little vignette from my life. When I was 10 years old, they changed the rules so that you could wear pants to school if you were a girl. So I was first in line on that, still am. And the teacher really hadn't been kind of read into the program that you were allowed to wear pants, so she sent me to the principal's office, where the principal told me that I looked like a girl, I looked like a boy, and I acted like one too, because I was a little rough and tumble on the playground, in addition to the pants and short hair. And that story, has stayed with me, because I thought, who the heck are you? What are you talking about? This was not the message I was getting at home. My mom was an operating room head nurse. She ran the show. She had 5 kids. So, Wendy, I wonder, in the education environment, how do we raise girls to understand that they can, kind of do it all?
Well, we have to do it. I'm just sitting here. As you were talking, I was thinking about one of my most recent excursions around the world, where I visited the folks that teach for Pakistan, many of whose teaching fellows are actually working, in schools with all girls. And to see these fellows stand up, in the first weeks of school, articulating to the girls that how they scored on their matriculation exams was going to determine where they ended up, calling upon them to, essentially 7th grade girls work towards 8th grade standards in this year, so that they could, expand the opportunities available to them, listening to the moms of these girls, through a translator, but talk about the truly transformative impact it has had on these girls to have teachers like these, who themselves were such role models about what was possible. So, there is no magic to all of this. This is about, ensuring that the educators we have in our schools are calling upon girls to fulfill their true potential and are role modeling for them and all of this.
One of the advances that some of our panelists have worked on is also dealing with teenage pregnancy. And a program we had started almost 30 years ago at the Milk and Family Foundation was our National Teacher Educator Award, kind of the Academy Award for teachers. And we were giving this award in the Detroit area of Michigan in the United States. And I was very interested in how this teacher that I had read about as we were about to give her the award had been able to achieve this. And she was doing an interview with the television anchors and commented that she had found the world's greatest contraceptive. So they were all interested in what is the world's greatest contraceptive. And as she told them, the world's greatest contraceptive was hope. And I think, Wendy, in some cases you're delivering that in those schools in Pakistan, the idea that you have opportunity, a future, etc. And that is what she had instilled in these young girls in Detroit, Michigan, was the feeling that they had hope in this area. You might just comment about dealing with young girls in South Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa.
Yep. It is important, yes, for these young girls to see other people, role models in the community who have achieved, for them to believe that they have a path forward, they have a way forward. We tell a story of a young girl named Tandy who grew up in the township, and we help to plan a path for her to see herself from being at school to actually working in one of the biggest companies globally, because they have no idea that that is possible, particularly if they're stuck in rural communities and they've never traveled outside of South Africa, they've never traveled outside their communities. So mapping it for them and actually bringing people who have done it before. I go around schools talking to young people a lot, And I tell them, it is possible for you to do it. You know, a lot of us have done it, and it is possible. But the important thing also is, you know, basic things that you would never even think of. A lot of young girls, particularly in schools in South Africa, drop out of school because they have to stay away at certain times of the month from school because they have no facilities, no resources for buying sanitary pads, something as simple as that. And therefore they don't go to school, and we wonder why they drop out in the long term. So providing simple amenities like sanitary towels for girls to be able to feel confident and go to school is important. Making sure that they are entitled to their own privacy, and they can interact in schools with their male counterparts. There are simple things that one can do.
Precious,
I was just going to ask you, Greg, a question, because you mentioned it, and I was fascinated by the role of entrepreneurship in South Africa and the role that you're playing there, because that is the single most empowering connector for women to get out of poverty. And that's where they need role models, strong role models. So could you talk a little bit about that? Because it sounds like that's something you're passionate about.
Yes, absolutely. Firstly, we know that if you educate a woman, you educate a nation. Mm-hmm. That is important. You educate a woman, you educate her family and her community. So we play great emphasis on the education. But secondly, we focus on women-owned businesses. What the foundation does is we identify businesses that have a chance of becoming sustainable and can create jobs themselves within the community. And we give them capital, and we go into a joint venture with them. So and we give them business support. So when these businesses do well, our share of the equity goes back to funding other businesses. So it becomes a self-funding exercise. And we find that access to finance has been one of the greatest impediments for women to start and run their own businesses. I think through the foundation we've found a lot of businesses that, can be scalable.
Excellent.
I think we've had a number of points here that I'd just like to reinforce that are key. Transformative philanthropy, the challenges for women. As you look at many countries around the world, we did a study showing that a young girl has as many as 80 hours a week of assignments in some underdeveloped parts of the world. What are those assignments? Getting fresh water, getting fuel to burn at night for heat, twigs, etc. during the day. And if you can create things that can substitute for that, filters for water that provide fresh water, new wells, etc. Or these machines, for example, in India, these small devices that allow you to burn cow dung, and you clean up the air and you provide fuel at night. It allows women to go to work and go to school. And so in many societies, one of the key things is to look at the assignments that young girls have to support a family, and can we find modern technology or other ideas that are available, and whether it's cellular power, etc., that can transform it. I think this concept, educate a woman, educate a nation, is a very important one that we should remember here. And I think, we've had two people from the financial world here, actually three, talk. Two of our hosts, Helena and Marissa here, really address a vision. But when you think about finance, finance is more than giving money. It's helping to devise whether that's going to be successful or not, working on the plan, etc. And philanthropy, likewise, is more than giving money. With that regard, Maria from the Nike Foundation and the Girl Effect, are you with us this morning? Because I'd love to call. Good morning, nice to see you. I'd like to see if you could give us some ideas behind that initiative of Nike.
Sure, thanks, Mike. I also have my back to everyone. The girl effect is this very simple concept, as you said. To educate a girl is to educate a nation. And one of the things that we found around girls that's very, very powerful is that none of us as individuals received one thing. We didn't just receive education or just receive health or just receive economic opportunity. we received a whole horizontal group of assets as we grew up. But when we try to do philanthropy, we often take a vertical approach. We just give one of those things. And girls often don't succeed in that environment. And so we look very hard to get collaboration to occur, because that's the other thing that we don't do as an industry of philanthropy. We all do our own thing. We all have our program, your program, but when we talk about partnership, we often really mean, I'll do what I do, you do what you do. Let's just put a name on it and say we're in a partnership. So one of the things the Girl Effect is about doing is getting us all working together toward those common goals and getting those horizontal needs, just not those vertical needs for girls met. The other thing that's very important is, I think what everyone's emphasized here, is the linkages of those needs. It's great to be in school from primary to secondary, but then you need to make that transition to employment and asset building of your own. So that whole trajectory, getting those connection points to happen, getting us all working together toward that common goal. The last thing I'd say, Mike, which I think is really important, and this is an amazing gathering here, is there's a lot of talk right now about girls and women. And I think the responsibility we all have in the community right now is to translate that talk into real assets. It's exciting to have conferences that have panels on this issue. What's even more exciting is when we see actual resources flowing. And if you do look, I don't have any charts prepared, but if you do look at the assets, the resources flowing to girls and women, it is still incredibly small. We have only just begun, and I don't want us to become drunk with the excitement that the issue's finally on the agenda and that we are finally seeing progress occur. I think we all have a real accountability in this moment. I believe it's a historic moment that we have in the world right now, where this issue is firmly on the agenda, whether you're at the World Economic Forum, the Milken Institute, whatever forum we go to, we're talking about it. But I hope we all are, triple, quadruple down on our commitment, like the great things everyone's talked about here today, not just doing the things, but connecting the dots between all of our individual efforts into something greater. And the last very quick thing I'll say is, before they're women, they're girls. And it's very easy to say women and girls. I've had one appeal to everyone is say girls and women, because before they're women, they're girls. And if you can't drop off girls at the end when you start with them. And we really have to focus on this period of adolescence where so many girls fail at that critical, very difficult transition of adolescence that we all made it through to get here, but girls in these environments don't make it through adolescence, and we've got to focus on adolescence.
Well, thank you. At the Milken Institute, we are never far away from leadership by women who once were girls also. And whether it's Margaret who runs Faster Cures, or whether it's Stacy Warden who runs our Center for Financial Markets that's with us today, or one of my bosses, Katie O'Reilly. Katie, are you with us this morning? Do you have any observations?
Thank you, Mike, for giving me a minute to speak. I want to, I'm just going to go into the front so people can see me. And I want to recognize Nancy Ozeas, who's another one of your bosses, who pulled together this great breakfast and this great audience of women. She's been a real leader for us at the Institute in terms of getting us motivated around making our programming a lot more diverse. We're a financial think tank, so a lot of our events and panels, as you'll see today, are really focused on the capital markets and finance. So for us, that can be a little bit of a challenge, getting very senior women on those panels. And Margaret and a lot of our friends in the audience here, including Helena and Marissa and Jody and Sonia, who I don't see here, but have been very helpful to us in helping to kind of broaden that scope. And in terms of what we're trying to do, I'll speak very quickly about the Women Financial Scholars Program. So the Family Foundation launched the Scholars Program back in 1989. Which was meant to identify high potential, high performing kids in underprivileged areas. So we provide, I shouldn't say we, because it's the Family Foundation, Mike and Lori, provide scholarships for these kids as they're going through their undergraduate work. And so our idea was to pair a financial scholars program at the Institute with the scholars program at the Family Foundation, so that we're kind of working within that pool of already identified high performing kids, we're going to choose 2 women who will actually spend some time with us at the Institute and get trained a little bit with Stacy, with Margaret, with my colleague Laura Deal-Lacey, who runs our Asia Center, and myself. So these 2 scholars will have a year at the Institute and do rotations through our different geographies, and learn a bit about the work that we do and meet other women in finance and the capital markets, not just women. But the idea being that we're helping to kind of push those women into finance and into the private sector. So we're always interested in people who are helping to support us to do that. So if you're interested in more information, let me know, or you can ask Nancy. And thank you again.
Thank you. And in wrapping up, I just want to make a couple points this morning that I think are so important. We've come a long way, and having women as the leadership roles as CEO of 3 of the largest companies in the world, General Motors, IBM, and Lockheed Martin, is an example of it. But today, just 1 in every $23 in conventional small business loans goes to women-owned businesses. And so part of our effort, I think, as stressed here before, is how do we get this? Even government agencies, for example, the Small Business Administration in the United States, women represent 30% of all small businesses in the United States. So 30%, and only receiving 16% of conventional loans and 17% of SBA loans. So they're only 50% of the level even of governments, so we have a long way to go. Where does philanthropy come from? Today we've heard from a number of corporate leaders here, but most of it still comes from individual giving. And so communicating via the web and crowdsourcing is a very important element. And I think to bookend our conversation today, Wendy started us with the concept of where you grow up, where you are, determines your future in so many ways, and access to education. But one of our challenges that's still with us, and we've just finished these studies in the United States, has been that of the top quartile of incomes, if you make it to college, 86% of the students graduate within 6 years. So if your family is in the top quartile of income, you have an 86% chance of graduating in 6 years. If your family is in the bottom quartile, 8% of students graduate within 6 years. So we have done a lot of work of getting the student out of high school and getting them into college, but something breaks down in college. And one of the areas that we've so focused on in the last 25 years in this Milken Scholar program that Katie spoke about is that out of 353 students, we have 351 success stories. That they've not only graduated college, but graduate school, and they've made it through. And so there's this important link that we need to remember here. It's not just getting them through high school or that level, but it's also supporting them later in life. And in closing, I'd like to use a quote from Margaret Mead. And this group today, this small band of sisters that I've brought up on stage with me today, are so symbolic of it, that never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. And in her studies of civilization, indeed, it is the only thing that does. So if you feel like you're alone, one of the reasons we started this session at 7:30 this morning was so that you can interact with each other the rest of the day and find those individuals who have been willing to change the world. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.